So greetings, everybody. Aloha, namaste, for all the different time zones that we may be in. I welcome you this afternoon to Jivamaya Yoga Wisdom Talks, and we're so honored to have Jennie Lee with us. Jennie is an award-winning author, just coming out with her third book, so exciting, coming out the hard copy beginning of September. Started in 2016 with her book, True Yoga, practicing with the Yoga Sutras for happiness and spiritual fulfillment. And in 2018, Breathing Love, Meditation in Action. And now we have this new book called Spark Change. So change is going to be the topic of today, which I think is something we're all experiencing big time. So this is really, really beautiful. So Jennie, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today. Perhaps we can start with just a little bit about you. How did you get into this yoga journey, and how did it all evolve?
Oh, well, thank you for having me with you today, Abby. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I know that many of your followers are also friends and followers of mine from the yoga therapy community, yoga community. So lovely to see whoever's here with us today. I have been teaching yoga for 20 odd years now and practicing yoga therapy in private practice. And I got into it, as many people did, through a strictly physical practice. And it was through many personal challenges, a lot of loss and grief, my own life, which I write a lot about in Breathing Love, my second book, that I started digging deeper into the philosophy of yoga and that ancient tradition that holds so much wisdom for our lives. It really is a science of living. And as so many others also have experienced, it's such a healing practice. And so my yoga therapy practice really evolved from wanting to share those tools and practices with others who are going through difficult transitions in life. And I also have a background in spiritual psychology. So I come to the yoga therapy world with a deep investment and perspective on the psychological and spiritual end of the spectrum, as well as the physical therapeutic practices in yoga therapy. And so, yeah, and my third book, which, you know, we're going to be chatting a bit about today, because it is certainly the topic of the day, change, spark change. Who knew that we'd be in the middle of this world crisis when it was releasing? That was not intentional, although I guess on some level of, you know, the higher consciousness, it knew that we would need some tools to navigate this time. And you know, humans are very resistant to change. And this is something that I experience often with clients who come to see me in my yoga therapy practice. You know, they'll come in and they'll think that they want change. And they might not quite know what that's going to look like. But then the real work of it kind of kicks in, and some of them run for the door. But anyway, the questions in Spark Change, and so much of what this book is about, does come from the work that I've done with yoga therapy clients, and that practice of inner inquiry that we have to undertake if we're going to navigate our way through any kind of change effectively. And that's change that we're initiating, or change that has just been dumped on our laps, like we're in right now collectively. And so it really is something that we have to decide individually how we're going to approach. So I'm excited to chat with you about that today.
That's beautiful. So this is released on September the 8th, which is awesome. And the format of the book is very, very interesting. How did you come up with the format? Because it's really very much a lot of questions.
Well, so the subtitle of the book is 108 Provocative Questions for Spiritual Evolution. And that was my working title as I was writing the book, because I knew I wanted it to be a book of questions. Questions to me are so very, very important, and they're so much a part of how I coach people, because I don't presume to know anyone's answers. but I have gotten very good over the years at asking directed questions, which will help get the wheels turning in their own mind and help them find those answers within. And so the intention behind making this a book of questions, and it's not just a list of questions, right? You've had a peek at it, and it's each question has with it kind of a bit of guidance. So how to engage with that, what to think around that question, and kind of how to go deeper into that inquiry, because it's considered, the book is considered a guided self-inquiry process. And in that case, you know, because of that, it's great for individuals to work through on their own. And it's also, I think, going to be a really handy tool for yoga teachers and yoga therapists, as we were chatting about, because it is broken into thematic sections. So depending on what somebody is coming to a session with, you know, what their kind of presenting challenges are at that moment, the teacher or the therapist could kind of go to that thematic chapter and get there's 12 themes or chapters and 9 questions per theme. So there's quite a bit of material to work through, and I hope that people will engage with it at a deep level and not just kind of, you know, spin through and grab the quickest answer. I think oftentimes the process of self-reflection takes time to digest and consider and allow deeper and deeper wisdom to come from within, from that soul consciousness that is within each one of us.
And would it be safe to guess, having not seen the book yet, would it be safe to guess that one of the chapters or themes that you have has something to do with the word relationship?
Here it is.
There it is.
It will be in hardback though. Does one of the themes have to do with relationship? Well, it's not the title of any of the chapters, no, but doesn't everything have to do with relationship? We are ultimately connected as oneself, according to the yogic teachings. And so we don't operate in isolation. And the more that we recognize that, I think the happier we become. Because as long as we are just going after our own little egoic desires and needs, we suffer a lot because they don't get met all the time. And one of the things that I think we're really being asked to step into on the collective consciousness level right now is this recognition that we truly are connected as one humanity, and that everyone's perspective matters, and we need to work towards the common good, environmentally, economically, socially. We won't survive unless we do work towards that common and collective good.
So I know I read a lot of Krishnamurti, who I happen to think was absolutely brilliant, and I'm sorry that I never had the opportunity to meet him in person, because I have a feeling it would have been quite an extraordinary experience. But he feels very, very strongly, as do many, many others, that this inner work, this inner awareness, or some people call it the human revolution, really cannot happen unless we're really aware of what relationships are to us. And I mention that because so many people now are faced with either the complete opposite, which is total isolation, or they're faced with the entire family home 24/7, and there's this all these mirrors all around them. And some people are getting a little bombarded by the realization, because the relationship is always a mirror of yourself. So the family is really going through some very, very deep cleansing right now, I think.
Definitely. There's so much here, right? To me, it all boils down to remembering that whatever we're experiencing, someone else is experiencing as well. So I'm going to start with the people who are quite isolated right now. There's a Buddhist practice called Tonglen, which is the taking in or the embodying of others' suffering and breathing out that quality that we are sending into the world, such as peace or compassion, in order to relieve some of that common suffering. But really what is happening in that process is that we are recognizing that we are not alone in our own suffering. We're a part of that other person's suffering. And it's, just that beautiful recognition of that shared experience. So even for someone who is currently alone or isolated in their home because of lockdown, I think it's very important to recognize that they are not alone energetically, because so many others are also having that same experience. So when we can energetically connect with others who are having a similar experience, then we stop feeling so alone. On the other side of the equation, like you were talking about, those of us, myself included, who are in a family situation or living with a partner or a spouse or children or all of the above, or aging parents or whatever, it is that constant mirror of what the other is showing us, and how, for better or for worse, right? Some people have a difficulty in perceiving within themselves those unlikable qualities that we are so easily pin on the other. And so our first practice in shadow work is really recognizing that whatever we're perceiving in the other absolutely lives within ourselves too. The flip side of that is whatever beautiful qualities live in the other also live inside of us. And so some people have more challenge with that. They're so self-critical, and it's very hard to self-witness from that standpoint of beauty and goodness. And so I do think it is intense time of practice to be looking at all of that all the time, with not a lot of maybe physical breaks from it. But the practice of meditation, and certainly the practice of introspection, when we sit down to do that with intention, that is a time that we can go inward, regardless of our external situation. So even if we literally step into the bathroom, if there's no other place in the house where we can create, a tiny seat for meditation, we can certainly have our time in the shower or something to be still with ourself and our own thoughts. And one other thing I'll say about this practice of introspection or self-inquiry that I write about in Spark Change is that it's so humbling, because as we look deeply at ourselves and begin to work towards self-improvement, self-development, we see all those imperfect, aspects to our human nature. And certainly as we do that, then we can be more compassionate to the other who is around us or in front of us. So it's beautiful in that way. I think it can be challenging at times, but it's also really beautiful because it does open the heart and creates a basis from which we can start to practice more self-love and also greater love and compassion for others.
So it's in a sense that sort of beginning of, or maybe it's not the beginning of, but the continuation of understanding that the chaos that is out there is very much the chaos that's in here. And so this is the chaos that needs to change in order for that to change. It's really interesting. I'm reading actually about India right now in the 40s, and it's interesting how in many ways so many similar emotions and thoughts and discussions were coming up at that time. And I think that many of us are asking ourselves those questions. For somebody who might be new at practicing meditation or practicing swadhyaya, which is self-awareness, how would you suggest that somebody really begins to go about trying to go inward and trying to quiet that mind and find that stillness?
Again, baby steps is always the way in. We don't learn anything, any skill, tennis, piano, a language, anything overnight. And so everything is a process, and certainly meditation or the practice of self-inquiry is a process, and we want to tread lightly, go in small steps. Often what occurs for people when they're beginning a practice of meditation is that there is so much noise and so many things that they really haven't looked at because they've just sort of pushed it to the side in order to carry on and get through the day. And then suddenly they maybe quiet the body, and then all of a sudden the mind is just so over busy and over loud that it's overwhelming. And so thus small entries in on a very frequent basis is the way to acclimate yourself to coming to that practice. You don't want to try to sit down for an hour the very first time. Sit down for 5 minutes and 10 minutes, and again, gentleness with yourself, deep kindness and compassion with the process. It's not easy. We all have a huge amount of stimulus and input and things from the past and fears for the future and all of this happening all at once in our inner world. And so in the same way that change is not going to happen overnight in our outer world, it's not going to happen overnight in our inner world either. And so it is just step by step and being very committed, but also very compassionate with the process.
And I would assume that especially in the beginning, but of course at all times, but the work with the breath and just the awareness of the breath is key.
Absolutely. I mean, breath practice, as we learn in the 8-limb path, that movement of prana or the life force energy that we cultivate through the breath practices is so important, because when the life force is disturbed or there's a lot of emotion, heavy emotion, then we need to be able to regulate it. So the breath practices that help us balance and regulate the disturbance of life force energy are super important and can help us settle into that quieter space over time. So yes, absolutely, very important practice.
So the journey of going in, which is really what yoga and Ayurveda actually are all about, is that self-awareness, and that it's constant to find to find and believe in that tremendous value of your life, and understand your purpose. For somebody who maybe is a little bit off track, they were there, they've been practicing for years. I have some friends who have been practicing yoga for years, and all of a sudden that's just not what they're doing anymore. It's very interesting. And I think there are times when it's very difficult to look at ourselves. And so to get back on that track again is very hard. Do you have any suggestions for somebody who's knowledgeable, who understands the Yoga Sutras, has studied them, et cetera, maybe even been a teacher for many years, and all of a sudden they're just out there and they've been thrown off that track and they're finding it hard to get back?
Well, I would, if I was counseling that person, I would ask some more questions first to get more information about what began them in moving off of their practices, what it was that pulled them away from their practices. It could be that they started ingesting too much of the world, fear, news, etc., and just that really has an effect on our psyches. I don't know. So without a little further information, further inquiry, it's a little bit hard to answer that question. But I think fundamentally, one thing that is really important, and this is something I write about in all 3 of my books, and I know it's something that you've talked about with some of your other guests, but is the remembrance, according to yoga philosophy, of who we are. Because this concept of Maya, or the delusion, the force of delusion that exists in this dimension, tells us that we are these separate, fragile, very susceptible beings, and we've got to claw and scratch our way to get our needs met. And, there's so much working against us. But you shift your perspective back to the truth, according to yoga philosophy, which is that we are part of one great whole, one great self. And so when we talk about self-awareness or self-inquiry, according to the teaching of Swadhyaya, it's really inquiring into that greater self. And the practices that take us back to the remembrance of that. And so also this outer and inner space is very important, because on a human level, all of our attention and all of our energy is outer focused. We are just plugged in through the senses all day long. And that's why the practice of meditation, where we take our, dhyana, we take our focus inward, and we train ourselves to leave the sensory world temporarily to have a different experience of self. That is when we start to then be able to come out of that time of practice back into the world, back into the sensory world, and we can engage without so much attachment, aversion, reactivity, and all of that. But if we have neglected the practices which tap us into the truth that lives within our consciousness, then yeah, surely we're going to be bouncing all over the place out here. It's chaos.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So from that, you were mentioning the word consciousness, which I think would be interesting for us to speak a little bit about. It is moving first of all toward the consciousness and that awareness, but then allowing it to be also, as you mentioned, more of a collective consciousness. And I don't know what tools you recommend. I know one which is a favorite of everyone's is karma yoga. Because it brings us back to that place where we understand that we are not the only one that is going through whatever it is that we might be going through. But are there some other suggestions that you might offer to?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I was listening to, I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and right now I'm on the Book of Joy with the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Uh-huh.
And the section I was in this morning on my walk was, they were talking about that we suffer most when we think of ourselves, and we suffer less when we think of others. And so, call it seva, call it karma yoga, call it devotion to the greater self. There's many ways of sort of coming at it, but at a very basic level, for all intents and purposes, think of someone else. Right. Just think of someone else, because it immediately takes us away from our own pain and our own challenges, and it puts us into connection with others. So that can be done so simply. And in my second book, Breathing Love, the meditation in action subtitle really speaks to this. And so many of the practices that I offer in that book are just short daily practices that we can do coming and going in our daily interactions. And it's this sense of, how do we live in love? How do we walk in the world as loving beings? And so, if we're barging into the store and letting that door slam on the person behind us, we're not going to be happier. But you know what? If we pause long enough and we hold the door and we smile at that person and they smile back, everybody's day just got better. And so from the smallest actions to the greatest acts of service, if we have the capacity or the calling to step into greater, modes of service, politically or environmentally or socially, however, then awesome. But everyone can do something. Everyone can think of others. Just being thoughtful creates such a different experience for everyone in the world.
I'm reminded of so much when you say that, from my upbringing, from schools, from parents, from everybody, and that is just that common courtesy, that deep respect for life itself. Yeah, and showing that to every life. It could be a tree, a plant, an animal, whatever, but showing that deep love and respect to any life whatsoever. It's gorgeous. So in these last 5 minutes that we have together, is there anything that you are seeing that you would like to address in regard to change, in regard to just being able to even handle what that word means for some?
Well, I'll just go back to something that we started with a little bit, which is how humans typically approach change, and we're typically quite change resistant. But I think this time that we're living through brings very much to mind that we need to be conscious change agents and conscious change makers. And so the more that we can proactively move into change, not only are we going to see greater results faster, but we're going to feel more empowered. Because I know for me, just sitting around waiting for something to change out there, or someone who even knows who's in control to figure it out, isn't gonna cut it. So I've been really working on, where does my power lie? What do I have some semblance of control over today? And let me work on that. And one of the greatest things that we have control over is our own mind, our own consciousness, and our reactivity to situations. So this is really, in my opinion, where the work needs to be for each one of us right now. And it is something that we can do regardless of our situation.
So in essence, you're really talking about embracing the unknown. And once we understand that you can't go from the knowing to the unknowing, you can only go from knowing to knowing. So once we understand that there's this unknowing and we're up against that wall, it's like there is nothing to do but to accept what is, to really be able to say, okay, here I am. I open up my heart, and you're right. So that acceptance that one goes through, it's very interesting to get to that point. But there's that what is element. Do you want to speak a little bit to that acceptance of what is, and how you can even slowly start talking yourself through that place?
Well, right, this is the practice of santosha for all intents and purposes, is the contentment in all situations, or this practice of acceptance. And I think we often sort of come to it by default because we beat our heads against the wall of resistance so long, and then we're just exhausted and we collapse into that sense of acceptance, which really I would just call collapse. And that's very different than consciously saying, I accept what is, and I will work from this point. And, you know, humans have lived through some pretty dire circumstances over the course of history. And those who have survived and who have come out well, cases like, you know, I think of Viktor Frankl and the survivors of such atrocities, that who decide that they will give meaning to their circumstance and they will not become victim to it. And so this is the choice that we each have, regardless of what we're faced with. That's the point of acceptance. And from there, we reclaim our power.
So it's, what is that saying? You never know how strong you are until strength is all you have, or something like that, right? You know, you get to that place where it's like, all I can do is put a foot forward. I don't even know where the foot's going to go, right?
Well, we build strength too through challenge.
Yeah.
Like lifting weights. We don't build strength if we're lifting a 5-pound weight our whole life. We got
right.
up a notch.
Right. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So this book comes out September the 8th. I just think it's so exciting, and I will be putting onto the download Jennie's website so that you can also read about her. And do you do Zoom consultations and things like that? Or
I do, Abby, and I'll just mention on the book, I know you're going to link this too, but there's a special guide that I've created for yoga teachers, yoga therapists. So I think that'll be really handy. It's free. You can just put your email in and you'll get that. There's also a free excerpt of the book available on my website. So please do, grab those freebies and see how it feels to you. And yes, I do Zoom consultations. So my whole yoga therapy practice has moved on to Zoom, as everyone else's has. So I am available for private coaching as well.
Great. So I'll put all of that in the Facebook for everyone, because that'll be wonderful for them to be able to know that you're available for them to speak to. So thank you. That's really beautiful.
Thank you, Abby. It was really lovely talking with you.
You're in Hawaii. I think it's amazing. And I'm in Las Vegas. I think it's about 115 outside or something.
Wow. Oh, I hope you're air conditioning.
I'm feeling the cool green coming over the Zoom screen. So I want to thank you so much. I really look forward to your book. I know it's going to be a huge success, and I'm so happy you mentioned that it is also very beneficial to other yoga therapists and people in the wellness industry, because it really helps us when we're faced with a client or faced with a friend or a family member, and we're like, I don't know what to do. You can just sort of take a pause, take a stop, and maybe open up a book to see where it opens. And there's the perfect question. Yeah. So that's awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a beautiful day. Thank you so much, Abby.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.